Basically, we'll go straight to law number 151, ordinance 590, amending new ordinance fire protection districts. Don't need to read the whole thing. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, members of council, you know, just want to review quickly with you where we are on ordinance number 590. I think it's probably the third work session we've actually talked about this. We'll go back through that really quickly. First reading was on September the 14th, 2020 council meeting. Second reading was on October the 5th. The public hearing is on November the 2nd. That was been noticed in the newspapers already. And then the third reading is scheduled at this time for November the 2nd as well. Those things that you see in front of you are the legal requirements for passing the ordinance. So everything else I'm about to tell you over the next 2 or 3 minutes is in addition to and beyond what we're legally required to do before we do anything like this. So that's just to refresh you on those items. You'll remember we talked about it on September 21st and also on October 19th, when we talked about it again. It was the subject of the Emergency Services Board meeting last week. I know the Emergency Services Board has been following this to various degrees. We've had members come to the committee or the public input meetings. We've had Emergency Services Board member there. The Emergency Services Board itself received the information and took no action on it the other night, and I contemplate they'll want to talk about it again. We've had some newspaper coverage about this, including a couple stories in the local papers about what we intended to do with the public meetings at the ones that are already scheduled, plus the ones we publicly did out at the fire stations. We did a Facebook Live video on it, set up the free room. The newspapers giving us some good coverage on it, talking about our public meetings and what's out there for everyone. The free room has been visited multiple times by different members of the public. Some just wandered in wondering what it was, but others came in specifically about that. We've had links on our website. We publicized it on Facebook with a video from Chief Gibson, as well as me mentioning it in some of my videos. We also had Chief Gibson went and spoke to conservatives at the Upstate on October the 8th and talked about the proposal as well as the public meetings that were coming up. And then we had 3 public information meetings where we talked about the proposal. We had some firemen, some members of the public, some members of the Emergency Services Board come to those meetings. We also have the video up on YouTube where we talked about it there. So we feel like, the reason I point all that out is that we've gone above and beyond trying to communicate, because I know that was something important that y'all wanted to do. I think we have probably communicated more on this proposal, which at the end is an administrative change to just the way our budget is set up. We've communicated more about that than anything else I can think of in recent memory. But one thing that we do have back is 75 survey results. That survey was linked from our main page. You could also take it in paper form in the free room. And so we've got 75 responses, and this is going to be too small for y'all to read, I think, probably, but just looking at some of these different questions, 61% of the respondents said that the fire department has responded to their home or place of business. Of those 75. The folks talking about whether or not they're satisfied with their level of fire protection, you only had a very small amount say that we're not. Agree, strongly agree, or neutral accounts for 90-something%. So people seem to be pretty happy of the respondents with their fire service. In terms of their current fire protection fee, you'll see that 26% said they strongly agree that they're satisfied with their fee. 8.8 said they're somewhat satisfied. Most people, or I should say the plurality of people, indicate they're really neutral on the fire fee, which means they probably don't notice it on the bill. And then somewhat disagree or strongly disagree accounts for about a quarter of the respondents. 27% said they're not satisfied with their fire protection fee. So I thought that was interesting. To the question, the fire fee should be based on the geographic location of the house. So where you are, regardless of the size of the house. That question, do you think it should be based on where you are in the county? 23%, about a quarter, said they agree. 13% said they somewhat agree. And then, but the largest, the plurality, went with strongly disagree. So people are saying no. Generally speaking, they don't like the concept of it matters where you are in the county, what you should pay. and this is, I'm satisfied with my current fire protection fee. I think that restates the previous one. A fire fee should be based on the geographic location. I went through the same one, so I apologize. Okay. Fire protection is an essential government service. Fascinating response here. So 77.9% of the respondents said they strongly agree. 8.8, so grand total, you're talking about 86% said that they believe it's an essential government service. Some were neutral, but there were a few respondents that did not believe fire protection is an essential government service, that's interesting. Tells you something about, the mindset of the folks responding, so it's interesting. To the question, people in similar houses should pay different fees depending on where they live within the county. So if you've got the same type of house, but you live in different places, you'll see that most of the people, far and away, most of the people said they disagreed with that idea, either somewhat or strongly disagreed, almost half. Fire protection in different parts of the county should have equal fee for equal service. 43%, 0.9% strongly agree with that. 15.2% somewhat agree. 21.2% are neutral. There's only a few, 13.6% of them are smaller amount that less than 20% said that they disagree with that. So equal fee for equal service throughout the county received positive grades. Neighbors that live on the same street should pay the same fee for fire protection. 46.3% strongly agree, 17.9% somewhat agree. So you've got almost 3/4 of the people, 2/3 of the people, easily, saying that they agree that if you live on the same street, you should pay the same fee. Now, you and I all know that if you've been to the free room, you can see an example that that's exactly the problem we're trying to fix. That we've got people that live on the same street that are paying grossly different fire fees. So anyway, we're still taking survey responses to this, but I wanted to give you an update on that. It seems to be that the huge majority of folks feel the way that we thought they would feel about this system. And the reason that I've said this is a broken system.
A question comes to mind looking at this, and I don't know if you asked that question on the survey, but the people taking the survey, the sample, how many of them came from a fee-based district and how many came from a
So
village
we
district?
actually did ask that question. We asked the respondents what fire service
So
area.
the village people are happy.
That is something we haven't broken it down by, but it would be interesting to look how the village folks are happy different than the fee folks. But we didn't break that down for tonight.
Hey, I was wondering, when are we gonna know, like if you have $100,000 house, what's your fire fees?
So the
Because
more,
I can tell you,
yeah,
people that's asked me, kinda wanna know that so that they know what their fire fee's gonna be and where the breaking point is and that kind of.
so we got that question in 2 of the public meetings. And I know that Billy also got that question in conservatives in the upstate. It's a natural question to say, wait, just tell us what the fee is. Then we'll know whether we like this idea. The reality, and this is a point that the chief and I have been making in all of these meetings, is you would never know at this point. That's determined in the annual budget. So what we have been telling folks out there, and what is the truth, is that this ordinance as it exists now does not address that. What it does is it allows all the little coin change jars, the 10 individual coin change jars that represent the budgets for these different districts, to be put into one jar. Then, in the spring, the way that we've proposed this, and of course this is a decision y'all would have to make, but then in the spring, like you always do, you'll look at expenses that you believe are appropriate, and you'll set the appropriate fee. The way that would break down is something y'all will decide, or I guess I shouldn't say y'all. The way we envision it, it would be the new council that would decide in the regular budget process.
Well, that could have a big bearing on the public's support for it, because if I have a 3,900 square foot house and I end up with a 1,500, and I'm sure it's not gonna be that,
Right.
$1,000 fire fee.
Right.
I'm probably not, I'm just like to know a break.
Yeah, I agree. One of the ways that I've been kind of looking at it, so what is the average?
The average, and I think we said it was $106 if you just
So-
took everybody and averaged.
So what we've been looking at is, we didn't say, let's put together a wish list and figure out how much money we want to throw out there. We were looking at it from a standpoint of, how do we keep it with based on right now, what would that be? So it's still on average would be the 105, 106, whatever you said.
But in the computer, you have all of the residents with the square footages. You know what you pay in last year's budget. It would look like to me, you have that computer program, it wouldn't be a big jump to do that.
Well, if y'all will remember, when
It was awful.
we did the math, when we were looking at the proposed back several months ago, and they laid out what it could look like, and I think it was Berkeley County's model, what we
That's
used.
right, we looked at Berkeley.
And it was 40,000, it puts 40,000 in the negative going by their exact numbers. But we looked at 84% of the residents would be under $150. That's 84% of the residents of the county would pay under $150. Somewhere between $90 and $150 is what 84% of the residents would pay.
Right, and part of that is because what y'all said and what we've repeated in the public meetings is this is not a mechanism to grow this budget. Y'all decided in the spring to grow this budget for a spring 5 years from now, or last year. That's the budget process. But what you all said is, it's the same pot of money. We're not growing that pot.
And we keep saying we need to have an idea of figure. If we go by what we talked about with the Berkeley model, we do have a figure. We do have an idea of what it would look like. I mean, when you're talking 24,000 homes, if you added $1, so somewhere between 91 and $151 is where 84% of the residents would be. That does give you an idea what you're talking about.
Gives you a range for sure.
Councilman Whitaker.
You know, when we first started talking about it, one of the things that appealed to me was the fact that you came up with a schedule.
Right.
And we had a square foot, and I was kind of thinking that would be part of it, and that was my fault for not understanding that. But I like,
Well, to me, I'm sorry, I'm interrupting you.
but I'm saying I like the idea of having it in the ordinance as a base. We're not at a budgetary point right now, but we can put a base in there of a neutral number, because that's where we would be. If we said, here's the ordinance and here's, now obviously we can put a mechanism in that to change that, because that is a thing that's adjusted every year, but we gotta start someplace. Well, we're already in a year, so why wouldn't we just make it neutral for what we have? And then people have an idea, okay, this is the square footage of my house. And the same thing goes with businesses, because, you know, now we're gonna have to go back and set all those businesses. We have a schedule. Why
So
can't we
basically-
just take the schedule that neutralizes it right now and put it in the ordinance?
So basically you're saying, let's just do the math on where we are now.
That's what we did. We've done it.
Right.
And you came up with it, and I thought it was brilliant.
Well, Ralph did one thing, and then I said, go do your homework, and I said, I just did math. So it doesn't affect the ordinance, because the ordinance, all the ordinance does is just change the structure. And it still means that when we get to the budgeting process, you still gotta look at, just like we do now, when they come with the fire fees, they go, hey, we wanna raise our fire fee by $10, and we're going, why? Now it would be the same premise but it's based on the square footage.
But I'll have it set in place now, so we have a structure in which we do.
A baseline?
A baseline, and then a structure of addressing it every year, because then it becomes not so much what the fire department wants, it's more the universal needs of everybody.
Mr. Chairman, Mayor,
Yes.
I agree with you with what you're saying, but I'm gonna play the other side of it for a minute. Let's look at the road user fee. That $20 fee is built into the ordinance. When was the last time it was touched?
I don't understand. But that's our fault. That's not the ordinance fault.
Yeah, been 4 years when I'm not here,
But that's not the ordinance's fault.
but that's my point. So I think if you are gonna go that extreme, and I don't like this idea, I'm just telling you up front, I don't like it. But if you're gonna put the actual figure in there, at a minimum, you have to put to increase with CPI.
The other thing I would say, and I don't want to get in the position, I say this, I'm respectful of the decision y'all are making, but I want to make this part of it clear so you know the decision you're making. There's an incredible amount of policy decision that goes in on how much is on commercial, how much is on residential, how much is on a big house, how much is on a mobile home. That's a huge policy determination that I think, I would suggest you we as a staff, you as a council spend a great deal more time on, as opposed to just this administrative change that allows us to budget in a uniform way.
So, I was gonna say, it just went right out of my head as you were talking about it, you made me think about something different. I apologize.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Before we go forward and do a third reading and approve the ordinance, I'd like to see us kind of know some of those numbers.
You've got, now, I asked you guys, I said, you got homework, go do the math, right? That was in that council, that committee of the whole meeting. And when we came back a month later, this was the math that we did, based on Berkeley, and then I gave you guys a little thing based on, I was doing the numbers to try to keep it at an even keel baseline. Because something that Vice Chairman said, and I'm giving you credit for this because I didn't think about it, the way our structure is set up now, if, let's say there's a fire that takes place in, I don't know, Easley, and Liberty Fire Truck, because of our box alarm system, they're close by for whatever reason, and they're off and running, and that fire truck gets caught up in the fire and destroyed. Who pays for it? People in Liberty right now pay for it based on their fire fee, not where the fire happened, right? This changes that because we're now looking at it. Everybody, the identities remain the same. Nobody wants to take away any identity. It's the Liberty, it's the Easley, it's the Pickens, it's the whatever. But it's how we're allocating the money now to make it more, or make it, I guess, more fair sense. Because you and I were in that same meeting when the lady stood up and said, why am I paying $100 and something for my mobile home? And I know the guy across the street's paying like a lot less than I am. How is that fair?
I agree, but I do think from what he said, it's $90 to $150. I think we could narrow that down a lot.
Well, it is, it's 90, 110, 130, 150.
Well, I think what Mr. Roper was saying is that we're gonna have to go address all this stuff.
Oh, that's what I was.
But do we have the time in the budgetary season?
Actually, that's where I was going, and I apologize. What I wanted to say is, in the past, the fire boards, when we asked this question, how did you determine that this commercial building was gonna pay $35,000 a year in fire fee?
Right.
And the answer was?
Right, so are we gonna be left to do that? What I liked, what you came up with, which was very simple, a square footage that we know. And I don't think you need to change that square footage. I think if that's in ordinance, here's the square footage. Now, obviously, every year we can adjust the fees as we know those things are gonna go up. But I think having the taxpayer know, hey, if I've got this size house, what we're gonna do is say, we're not gonna put it in the ordinance, but then we're gonna do it next year. Well, why don't we just do it now?
Because if you do it now, and to answer that specific question, if you do it now,
Right.
it'll have no legal significance.
Well, in this council, you can't set the
Before
budget.
next budget year, you're gonna.
Exactly right. We'll adjust it in the budget, but at least we start with zero so that people can look at, okay, here's what my square foot house is gonna be.
But what you're gonna do is put a whole bunch of policy decisions in that number, and then where are you gonna be in the spring? You're gonna have to debate all this.
Policies there, it's gonna be neutral. It's gonna be the same amount of money. I think we start at a neutral point because we're asking the people to support us on something. We're not telling you what the final number's gonna be.
Well, it's because and I'm not, and I wanna say this respectfully, I'm not arguing with you, I'm just pointing out the information we talked about in public meetings, okay? And that is, you would never know that number now. And if we went back 10 years ago and somebody said, tell me what my fee's gonna be, you're not gonna find it out till the budget gets passed.
But I know what it is this year.
So,
I know it may change next year. Right now, I'm passing, I have no idea what it is. Because next year, right now, it's zero until we come up with a new number. So I don't know where that number could be.
and obviously, it's, your gentleman's decision to do this, but I believe that if we shoehorn something in, a rate schedule now, we're just gonna complicate what is an administrative change that might be attainable.
Well, let me ask this question. Is it possible to do, I realize we can't make the decision on what the fee is gonna be. It's the future council that's gonna do that.
That's right.
Is there a way that we can put in, based on this current structure, a sample, if we took a snapshot of today, of what that would kind of looks like.
Something like this.
I mean, you could use that,
Example.
you could use that, but do you know that this next council is gonna wanna do that instead of a flat fee?
No,
No, but that's the whole point, is that we're putting in, we're making ordinance to do this.
Right, in other words, you keep the structure.
It sounds like six of y'all believe something, and none of them are having an opinion. That's what it sounds like.
If we're saying, no, we're voting on the structure.
Right.
Right? We're not voting on what the fees would be. Here's the structure. Now looking at it as today, if we take this sample that he has here, okay, based on the $106 average and square footage that we've laid out, this is where we are. This may change with the new council as they go into budget, but it's going to use this structure based on square footage for residential and commercial.
So you have that, just to give you the mechanism, you have that amendment there in that package that you need to make, the proposed language that will allow that.
I just
You
think,
would ask for it.
and I understand what you're saying, we're gonna have to go through this again in spring, we gotta go through spring whether we do it now or not.
And the year after
All
that,
it
the year
does
after
is
that.
just give the residents of the county a little feel for what it's like. I so much feel like that we have to pass it first, then we'll find out what's in it.
See,
That famous line.
No, but I hear you, that's not what this is.
I understand, but it's like, well, what is it gonna do for my house? Well, we don't really know.
but if you were to put this in that ordinance and it passes now,
Sample,
you'd have to put it in, worded as a sample. There is physically no way without messing absolutely everything up.
Everybody
You
was
have
talking
to-
about putting it in order.
Well, but we're gonna change it next year anyway.
You can't vote on a fee
For next year.
for next year.
True.
No, we would be doing it for this year's fees to match what we have.
It's a sample.
Already built.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm
Already
asking.
went out and we're 6 months in.
Right, so with this.
We're gonna put in a sample, that's what I'm saying, a sample based on this year, not just a sample, random numbers.
But
Go ahead, what were you gonna say?
well, the problem with that is if you do decide to go to a flat fee next year, or 2 years from now you decide to go to millage,
You gotta change the order.
you changing the
Well, we're
entire
gonna
ordinance.
change ordinance anyway.
No, maybe, I don't know.
If we decide to do something different, we change ordinance.
So I'm gonna say this, if you don't inform the public, and they don't have a good idea when you're not gonna get support for it. I mean, we may pass it, but you're not gonna get support for it without, within just blindly not knowing a ballpark of what the fee's gonna be, they're not gonna support it. And if you do something like this without the support of the public, it's not worth a dime. And that's all I'm saying. If you can come up with something that's close, where people kind of know where it's gonna go based on what they pay now, that's good. It may not be exactly to the penny, and it may change a little bit next year, but something close.
So Councilman Bowers, you gave, I don't want to mischaracterize the numbers, but I think the numbers you were giving would be instructive to the public. Was that 83% are gonna be between this range?
That's, if we go with like the Brooklyn model,
Right.
literally, it's the 120 is the middle figure, but between $90 and $150, we're 84% of population land.
What about breaking it down by square, not putting a dollar value on square footage, but the categories per square foot, is it possible to do that? Putting that in there,
Kind of want something.
but not putting a dollar value because we don't know. But do that, so, for example, if I live in a 2,000 square foot house, I say, okay, all right, this range, I see that's where my house would fall in the range. All right, here's a sample from whatever, this is what it would be. Well, you know, at least include the categories of square
So
footage.
like from 0 to 1249, 1250 to 1499, 1500 to 1749,
And then-
1750 to
And then
1999.
use your example of what in the bell-shaped curve, where does it fall? The 68% or whatever percent fall.
You could put it in there and say, this is what it would look like with the current budget, approximately, with numbers in there, because it's great to say square footage, but knowing approximately what you're gonna pay, because it ain't gonna be too far from that, cause it's gotta match how we're generating income. In here, we need to explain to people how we're going to match our income.
Right.
And by putting it in the square footage, and here's approximate, this is what this year's looks like. Obviously, next year's under next year's budget, but this is what it looks like now, so it's not gonna be too much different than that. Because this is how, this makes us whole right now, and you can at least see, okay, if I got this size house, here's how much I'm gonna pay. I think that's being transparent to the public, cause it's gonna be pretty close to that anyway.
I do kind of like this, and I know what you're saying, in that you don't want us to get so far down the road that we're trying to set policy on, what are you doing with the 200,000 square foot commercial building? What are you doing with it? But if we go ahead and kind of set the swim lane, so to speak, of what the structure is, and then we can plug in numbers of what we have now to show that the baseline, you know, again, it's math. I don't think it'll take that long. I think you could probably get that by the next council meeting.
We already got it.
You got that sound?
Yeah.
At least
And that's kinda
people have
shows-
an idea.
Right.
It is gonna lock you in a little bit. It's gonna lock next year's council.
It won't lock them in, because on the budget process, they'll change it. This is a sampling of what it would look like under this year's budget.
But think about that next year, when we're in that budget conversation next year, and people say, no, you said my fire fee is gonna be $145, you're going up $10.
Yeah, but every
Well,
budget
actually,
cycle, we do that.
In reality, he's right, but like currently, we have 1,100, well, when this was printed, which was 6 months ago.
Right.
We had 11,814 between 0 and 1249. I'm willing to bet that number is not accurate today.
That's not-
I'm willing to bet 10 years from now that number's gonna be way.
No doubt.
And so it literally, that's another reason why you can't lock it into the ordinance and anything other than an example, because that number will change. The number of units alone will change, but your needs will change too. Which is where my CPI suggestion came from, but I don't like that, so.
Yeah. I just think that having something, people can at least get an idea based on what we have now.
So if we were to, I mean, basically, if we put in the breakdown of the structure between the square footage, and that's in the ordinance, then that would take 3 readings to change that. But the dollar amounts, you could change how, I mean, the future council can go up or down based on.
And quite frankly, I'm, cutting against what the recommendation here is, but the gentleman wants to power in this circumstance. We could say what the lowest fee would be. You could say this is the structure and the lowest fee in this approach would be X amount of dollars, and you could do that too. The decision on whether it goes graduated like Berkeley County or not, that's where I was recommending against us going up road on, because I feel like that needs its own special debate, but I hear what you all are saying.
I think we're already, we have been talking about that part of the structure for months. And that's when the homework came in and we decided to look at it. And the goal is not to figure out the baseline, not to raise it, but how do we stay with what we have, what does that look like?
This is in some ways in line with the millage fee, because the value of a millage changes year to year. In reality, we don't know our tax bill based on what the millage is set at, which is.
Right, but that's for future council.
But no, but I'm saying
As far
our
as-
millage, but this is still the same concept of,
In a sense.
that it works the same way.
It's
the ebb and flow is like-
it's a fee based on square footage as opposed to a fee based on value.
But
There is a
still,
close correlation.
Well, now.
So where staff is saying, we don't wanna get into the nitty gritty on the square footage, and what we're saying is, we want to be able to show the public, here's what you can look at from this year. If we were, doing the numbers this year, here's what it would look like. But it's just a sample. That doesn't mean that's what it's going to be next year. So your number may vary from that based on what happens with the market, what happens with the economy, what happens with there's a lot of factors that go into, as we talk about budgets. So.
But obviously the concept works, because it's being done other places.
That's right.
By square footage.
That's right.
So it's not like we're going out we're gonna try something totally new.
Right.
This is something that's working in other places, doing it by square footage.
Well, the problem you could run into though is if that fire truck from Liberty went to Easley and caught fire and burned up, what if 2 or 3 more Since the band fired 2 or 3 more wet bands, that would be terrible because the cost of replacing those.
To the residents of a specific.
Those are insured, right?
We'll check on that. No, they are, but there would still be deductibles. One of the things we do is try to carry more deductibles so that the rates stay down, but it's a fair point.
That's a,
Yeah, I think
okay.
it's a good point too, but.
He's talking about the deductible.
So your other option, if you don't go with, total square footage, you know what you gotta have for residential, you know what you gotta have for commercial, you know what you gotta have bottom line. Your other option would be to do one flat fee across the board. The only issue with that, and we haven't said this tonight, we've said it hundreds of times, we haven't said this tonight, but the guy that lives in the $5 million mansion versus me that lives in my single wide on the back corner of my back 40, we're paying the exact same thing, and there's some disparity in services provided. We've got to ask the question, are we okay with that? As residents, are we okay with that? As people, are we okay with that? And if we are, then, you know, so yeah, that's what the people want.
You said disparity, there's no disparity in service.
Absolutely. If you're fighting, if Brad comes and fights a fire at my mobile home, if he's not there within the first 10 minutes, I got nothing left. If he's there in the first 5, I might have a shell.
Right.
If he rolls up to my $5 million home, he could be fighting it for a day and a half.
No, what I meant was I'd seen.
Sorry, Brad.
No,
You're in the room. I think I'm Billy last time.
I had seen the question about, does that mean I'm gonna get less service based
No,
on?
no.
So,
The amount of resources.
right, okay.
And that's what you gotta ask. We haven't said that tonight.
Right, and one of the things we had done with this is we've shifted some of the costs away from the residents. And the overall picture came up with putting more on business because business costs more to protect.
Yes.
We've got monthly things we gotta do, chemical updates, stuff like that, so I think in doing the graduated scale, we've also burdened more where the costs are. Okay, and I think that's one of the things that I like about this, but having this, we haven't addressed that. I think we need to add that into this.
All that really does is give the mechanism.
It's just the mechanism, as we say, one of the things that I was very pleased with was the fact that we're shifting costs to where the costs
Yeah,
are.
right.
Okay, and I think that's what this does, which I think is fair.
Yes, I agree.
And so if we could add, put the structure in and just say, here's a sample based on what it looks like this
So
year.
you actually have that amendment language in there.
Right.
That you would need to make if you wanted to do that. I think adding the word sample.
Where are you talking about?
It's in the.
It's in a draft. It's a paper clip by itself.
Yeah.
Starts
This
with
would
fee
be,
schedule.
this would be based on this year's what it looked like. Obviously, the new budget year, it can change, as it can every year in the budget process.
So then I'd like to make a motion that we move this out of committee, adding the fee.
Chairman, there's one other thing, and I apologize.
Yes, sir, go ahead.
One other thing that changed here, and that is this changed based on feedback from a couple of you wanting that potential language. There's also in the ordinance a change that makes it clear that this ordinance has no impact on our agreement to operate within the city of Liberty and within the town of 6 Mile. And conversely, the language is in there that it doesn't impact our contractual arrangement for the cities of Easley and the town of Central to provide the services in the rural district. So it specifically says that in the ordinance.
You got, on behalf of Councilman White, so like, thank you for putting red line.
Red line is the way.
There's a red
There's a red
page in
line.
there.
Yeah, the whole red
There's a
page. I saw that.
page.
That was based on feedback from your last meeting, we included that, so if we're gonna amend, we need to amend that as well.
Good.
Okay, so,
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion to move this out, taking in the amendments that are noted in red, addressing the city issues with Liberty, 6 Mile, Central, and Easley, as it's stated in this amended ordinance, and also add the amendment, titled fee schedule, making note that this would be a sample to what this current year's levy fees would be.
I'll second that. Is there any other discussion?
I mean, are y'all in agreement on the classifications per square footage based on that sample? Is that what would be going on next spring?
So this is what he's talking about, is
Sure.
if we wind up Here's my concern, is we've been talking this thing for 4 years. And I'm tired of talking this thing for 4 years. We have an opportunity to move this forward. And I think now is the opportunity to move this forward. Am I okay with this is the sample of the fees based on the square footage? Is it set in stone? If we say it has to be the square footage, it has to be the square footage?
You can redress that, please.
I mean, or if it does, it take another ordinance?
You can do it either way. Budget would be an ordinance, so that's what we're gonna affect.
Oh, it'll be another ordinance. So this is based on what we put in front of us and talked about.
But the argument, this is kind of argument on this, and somebody could argue, okay, you said this, but no. They're gonna say, change the classification, maybe 2 classifications, where somebody might be getting less if we jack theirs up, and not have as many categories.
Okay, so Councilman Hendricks, I mean, you're arguing of what the fire boards did every year and changing.
No, I'm saying that's what some people might argue, that's what
Well,
I'm saying.
and they did that, and future council would have the ability to create another ordinance to make the changes to do whatever. What we're saying is, what I wanna say on record is I want it to be baseline and make it as fair as possible for the people who live here. I think there's gonna be a lot of people who are gonna see a reduction in their fee. I think it's gonna be, to Councilman Whitehurst's point, we're putting the structure in place where the commercial is actually paying a little bit more because it costs a little bit more to take care of those things. And quite frankly, it does not make sense to me
I don't
to
think you
have
understand what I'm saying, though.
Okay, what are you saying?
That if you don't set in stone what square foot categories could be, you understand the change, but if you don't, right now you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of them for residents, 8 categories. Alright, what's to say, in the spring, council says, alright, we only gonna have 2 categories per square foot.
Nothing, there's nothing,
It could be
there's nothing in stone anywhere.
We couldn't, you can't.
Senator Russ is in the
But-
room, and if he gets enough support, he can change any state law he wants if he got
But-
enough support to do it.
But you understand that some constituents may think that.
I don't know how to debate
We can't make an ordinance that cannot be changed by a future council.
True. Anyway,
Exactly.
no, I'm not arguing that.
Okay, well, that's what you said.
No,
What's
but
preventing
my
them from
point
changing it?
my point is that some constituents might not have trust in this based on the wording. That's in general what I'm saying.
Okay, so there's a motion and a second on the table. Do you wanna make an amendment to the wording?
No, I'm just throwing that out for conversation to see what y'all think about it.
I can't follow it.
I don't know either. I'm trying.
I think what he's saying is he's calling it a sample. Is that gonna be misleading in some way?
But you can call it the real thing, but it can be changed next year.
The fee schedule, sample fee schedule, I don't know how the word I'm looking for, we're trying to show people this year, because this year, the fee's already there. We're not changing this year.
That's right.
But putting this in place, here gives you an idea of what you would pay based on your square footage. So, and I think that's what
And
we've all
actually-
said, we want people to be able to see that and go, oh, okay, or, oh, no, wow, I've got a 3,000 square foot home and I'm gonna have to pay this much money.
Well, and actually, Mr. Chairman, looking at it, we've left industrial out, and we were figuring, because I think that was something staff was gonna work on, and it shows a $41,000 deficit, if you'll look at the very bottom of the difference. So it being the actual schedule, it's not, in no way, shape, or form was it ever intended to be. It's purely a sample of what it would look like.
So do you have an amendment?
No, I don't, I just want to throw that out for food for thought on that. But I understand what you guys are saying, that nothing set in stone has to be changed, but from what a constituent may ask or throw up at us.
Okay.
And that's why I brought that up.
Okay. Any other discussion?
I do wanna make it clear that this is a sample purely because it's showing it's leaving areas off and showing a $41,000 shortfall. It is purely a sample.
Completely left off the chicken things.
It did, no more chicken coops according to this.
thought we couldn't have chicken houses in Pickens County.
Oh, yeah, you mentioned this.
This is the
It's
city.
not the city of Easley.
Oh,
Clemson, not the city.
Clemson allows chicken,
Oh,
yeah,
there you go.
Any other discussion?
but not a big house.
All those in favor, signify by raising your hand. That motion carries. All right, next item, and we're running close on time, is the, law number 159, Second Amendment sanctuary proposal.
The last time we discussed it,
Yeah, no, so.
Get fired up, Carl.
You got your natural too.
yeah, that's
We had asked, Attorney Hendricks to do some research for us, and you did, and you sent us a memo. Which you all have a copy of, if you all had a chance to read the memo? Is there something, do you wanna speak to this? Or-
Just briefly,
Like an AG's opinion.
yeah, it was actually refreshing to be able to, review the hierarchy of the laws of the United States. And one of the things that was clear to me is that this council fully supports the Second Amendment. And so when I was asked, how do you support it, legally, that was an interesting question to me. I'm gonna give a real brief outline of how the law is set up. I know you're in a hurry, and we'll go quick. And this is something that I believe you all know. We've all sworn a oath to the Constitution of the United States. I have the South Carolina Constitution as well. And that is the law of the land. The U.S. Constitution is the law of the land. And when it was enacted with the first 10 amendments of the Constitution, which we call our Bill of Rights. Those rights are the law of the land. So everything that emanates downward from that overreaching law that we have is based on the U.S. Constitution. So when the Second Amendment is, when we talk about the Second Amendment, we look at that and it's basically the right to bear arms. The South Carolina Constitution also has a article in it that has the same, basically the same rights. And in the U.S. Constitution, the powers that the U.S. Constitution have are what the Constitution has. It says you have the right to bear arms in the Second Amendment. First Amendment, right of speech, other Bill of Rights, other rights that we have. And it, as the federal government, has those parameters that it must operate under. So it is the law of the land. It says if we don't have power, if the Constitution of the federal government doesn't have power, that is reserved to the states. So the 10th Amendment reserves it for the states. The states then aren't, local governments are not mentioned in the U.S. Constitution. The state governments are, and the state governments are given power that the federal government doesn't have. Now the state governments then delegate powers to the local municipalities, counties, and other governmental organizations. In South Carolina, we do that through home rule. In home rule, the state of South Carolina says that the counties of the state have the authority to enact regulations, resolutions, and ordinances not inconsistent with the Constitution and the general law of the state. So when you're talking about an ordinance that is talking about that is related to the Second Amendment, then that ordinance, if it's to be valid, must come from the allowance that the state has given us under home rule. South Carolina has a statute which expressed exclusive jurisdiction over gun rights. It's 23-31-510 that says the state of South Carolina regulates those rights. In essence, no governing body of any county, municipality, or other political subdivision in the state may enact or promulgate any regulation or ordinance that regulates or attempts to regulate the transfer, ownership, possession, carrying, or transportation of firearms, ammunition, components of firearms, or any combination of these things. And I'm going to move quick. all right?
Okay.
So what we're talking about is that the state has taken the regulation of firearms in South Carolina as its own jurisdiction. Okay, so the state does that. It says no county can do that. Now, there are counties that have passed resolutions, and resolutions are fine. This county passed a resolution in support of the Second Amendment. There are other counties that have passed ordinances, and those ordinances do different things. One in our neighboring county that was brought to us and presented to council in the last meeting delegates, and I'm talking about Anderson County, is an ordinance that delegates some responsibility to individuals in Anderson County to determine whether or not the Second Amendment is applicable in certain laws. One of the problems is that creates a potential liability for the county. If you say, okay, we have the Second Amendment, we know that's the law, but what we're going to do is we're going to have our sheriff determine whether or not a regulation or a law is violative of the Second Amendment. In other words, does a law that is passed violate the Second Amendment? Then you have taken away the power that the United States, the citizens, gave under the U.S. Constitution, that reserved the right that it has, and then gave power to the state, and the state gave power to the counties under home rule. You take that away and say, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to decide it here. We're going to decide it here by our sheriff. So you've taken away what our structure of law is and put it with somebody else. And that creates potential liability. There are several Supreme Court cases that have construed the Second Amendment. We don't let violent people or felons have firearms. That is constitutional. The District of Columbia one time tried to say you can't have a handgun here. The Supreme Court said, but yes, you can because you have the right to defense. But there are restrictions on the Second Amendment in the sense that no felons can have weapons, which I think we all agree with. South Carolina, as a matter of fact, passed a law that said anybody convicted of first-degree criminal domestic violence, first degree, the highest and worst case of criminal domestic violence, you can't have a handgun, you can't have a gun, you can't have a weapon. If our sheriff decided that that was a violation of the Second Amendment, and he said, I'm not going to take away that person's gun because I think it violates the Second Amendment, not because the U.S. Constitution says that, based on what the Supreme Court says in our history of the Second Amendment in the United States, then he makes that decision. So if you pass an ordinance where you designate somebody else to decide what the Second Amendment is, then you have created a potential liability for yourself. Because if he doesn't follow what you said to do, then aren't you liable if something goes wrong? Maybe, maybe not. Now, the likelihood that in South Carolina somebody's going to bring a lawsuit against a sheriff who doesn't enforce what he believes is a Second Amendment right, I think is very slim, but the potential liability is there. Now, so what's your question? How do you support the Second Amendment? Well, you support the Second Amendment by doing exactly what you've done. You passed a resolution that said we fully support the Second Amendment. Pickens County, through its county council, fully supports the Second Amendment. You got 1/3 of you guys are going to be gone come January, and there's going to be a new council going to come up. Maybe that new council should do that as well. But a resolution has no potential liability for the county and certainly shows the same support. You'll say, but what if we don't pass a resolution, and does that somehow lessen our support? Well, no, because I don't think that any resolution that you pass that's in violation of the Second Amendment by taking away our constitutional rights by putting some other system in place, I don't think it's going to be upheld. So that is a legal perspective on the Second Amendment. That is as short as I could do it. It is an interesting question to me. I will tell you that if you pass an ordinance that has to do with the Second Amendment, the potential liability is out there, but it is not illegal for you to pass that ordinance, okay? You may pass that ordinance, Anderson just passed it, so it is okay to pass that ordinance. It just is the possibility of any potential liability that the county may have, who I represent, if you do pass that ordinance.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Pickens County Council has no control over the sheriff of Pickens County. Sheriff of Pickens County can enforce laws at his discretion. We can't tell the sheriff to enforce this law or not enforce this law. But my feeling is by passing an ordinance supporting of the Second Amendment, at least he lets him know where we stand as a county government and an entity. Now, it's interesting that you said that about local. Local people can have an impact, because when the Brady Bill was passed many years ago, federal government come out with very strict rules about telling local law enforcement what they had to do. Well, this little sheriff in Arizona sued the federal government, and he won. And the federal judge admonished the federal government for passing a law and said, you can't tell the sheriff what to do in his county. You can't designate him to enforce your ordinance. The sheriff in each county is the most powerful law enforcement entity in that county, because he's the only one elected by the people. And so it does make a difference in these local areas what the sheriff does. Pickens County Council cannot tell the sheriff of Pickens County how to do his job. He can't do it. As far as civil liability then, or liability, I don't know how much liability we would have if we're not able to tell the sheriff what to do. What I see this is, we're letting our sheriff know if something comes along and it's not right, and you stand up against it, maybe you can sue the federal government, that this is how we feel about the Second Amendment. This is where we stand on the Second Amendment. And, I think that's a very important thing. The sheriff's he's going to use his discretion on how he enforces the law, what he tells his officers to do, and he's not going to look to Pickens County Council to do his job, or at least I hope he don't. But I'd like for him to know that if he decides to take some kind of action and it's constitutionally correct, then we're going to stand up behind him. Because I'm going to tell you something, right now, we are facing one of the biggest challenges in my lifetime, because there's a lot of people in our country right now that are saying if they get into power, they are going to do away with it. Now, can we do anything? Probably not, because I agree with you, county council only has so much power. But you know what? If people don't start standing up and taking a stand somewhere, where does it start? The citizens of Pickens County are expecting us to do that. If we're too afraid to do it or unwilling to do it, what happens? And I understand all the things that I've heard here, but I also know the sheriff is an entity unto himself. He doesn't answer to us in enforcing the law. He has he's independent, and so whatever we pass here, I can't see anything in the ordinance that would put us potentially, and of course I'm not an attorney, but let me tell you something, if there's counties all over the country that's doing this. Up in Virginia, where it's much more liberal than it is in South Carolina, most of the counties has passed these ordinances, and they see a problem. And I'll tell you this, and I'm not going to get too upset about it. I'm not going to fuss at anybody if they don't agree with what I say. But I'll say this: the people of Pickens County are conservative, and if you put this out on a poll, they'd vote for it 80%. And we are supposed to reflect what the people in our county, and I don't see where this is going to be anything that's going to be negative or anything else, cause it does not. We cannot tell the sheriff what to do, but I think it would be very, it'd be very positive with the people of Pickens County. That's who I represent, and,
So I wanna say to you what I was trying to say to you before, and.
when I had to work at that.
Are you okay?
Yeah.
So, looks good.
So, there is a lot of fear right now in the country. And I understand the passion. My concern, which is, he's answered, was, I'm not voting on anything that's illegal, right? And he said, not illegal. And I got to thinking about it after we left, and I was like, you know what? The law already exists. We're just saying, we're voting on a law that already exists. We don't really have the authority to vote on that law, but if it's going to make people feel better, then I'm all for it. Because I'm all for the Second Amendment. I'm all for,
Let me say this, I forgot to say.
what I was worried about are the unintended consequences, which is what he says all the time, is do we open ourselves up for any problems by doing this? But the law already says it is what it is. That we believe in the gun rights, it's the Second Amendment. So what I'm worried about is that we spend an inordinate amount of time creating a new law that does exactly what the old law does, and I agree with it. So I don't,
Well, think about
I want to
this.
move it forward.
Think about this. Sanctuary, illegal immigration, cities and counties all over the
For
country,
illegal immigrants.
they are going against federal law.
That's right.
They're telling the federal government, we're not gonna enforce the law. They're going against, we're not going against it, we're saying,
We're
you
going
know
with you
what?
on it, right? I'm agreeing with you, Carl. I'm saying I'm on
I
your
just,
side.
that just goes over my head, I'm sorry.
I got a question for you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Let's look down the road and hope this does not happen, but say, for example, the powers on the national level swing and they say, we wanna do away with the Second Amendment, what's your philosophy on this ordinance then? If the.
My philosophy on the ordinance is the Second Amendment is the Second Amendment.
No, I'm talking about election changes.
Yeah,
And they say, no more Second Amendment, taking the guns.
I'm-
The federal government
okay,
says that.
but
Then
here's-
what's your
here-
viewpoint then?
Here's my thing, man. Here's my thing. I don't, I hope and pray that doesn't happen. I also want us to be careful on passing laws about what may or may
So what-
not
so
happen.
what's your opinion on it?
My opinion on the Second Amendment is I 100% support the
Federal
Second
government does
Amendment.
away with it if it goes haywire in November.
So the council still doesn't have any power,
True. But.
but I don't know what you're asking me. I'm saying I'm supporting it. I don't know what else you want me to say.
So the federal government does away with the Second Amendment.
I still
Understand that.
support it.
Understand that. They do away with it. You don't support the federal government that says you can't have a gun.
No, I'm still supporting the Second Amendment because it's in the U.S. Constitution.
No, but they-
Not from a single
Well,
person.
Congress, for a little point, Mr. Attorney, can you explain that the government just can't walk one day and say the Second
No, I'm
Amendment
talking
exists?
about, no.
One person can't do that either.
No, but that requires the states to do that too.
One of the things, Mr. Chairman and Councilman Hudson, what I was asked to do was to look at the Anderson ordinance. And when you're talking about the sheriff, what you said is exactly right, is that the sheriff is unto himself, the most important law enforcement officer in the county. But what the Anderson ordinance did is it said, it shall be the duty of the sheriff of Anderson County to determine whether any federal or state regulation of firearms, accessories, ammunition violates the 9th Amendment, 10th Amendment, 2nd Amendment, 4th Amendment, and the right to keep arms. So that's the portion that I think you should not pass, because that's what gives you liability. Councilman Hendricks, on your idea, there's nothing that says that you can't pass something that has the exact language of the Second Amendment of this county. Pass it. It's the law of the county, the law of the state, and the law of the federal government.
Isn't that what we did with the resolution?
A resolution is a proclamation.
Right,
Which
I guess the point is, and be real calm. What I don't believe in doing stuff just for political show. And if we pass an ordinance you just said that the sheriff, it doesn't do anything for the sheriff, because he does what he wants to. So my point is, what authority does the ordinance carry? It doesn't carry any authority. So it's just a feel-good thing. We're just trying to make people feel good. And we got a society where everyone's all worried about making people feel good, and the role of government is to do what government needs to do, not to do stuff just to make someone feel good. Because sometimes just because something smells good, looks good, and sounds good, doesn't mean it's always good. But having an ordinance that doesn't have any power, any teeth, doesn't represent anything but to say, hey, we want to pass an ordinance when we've already passed a resolution that says we believe in this. The state regulates arms in this state. The state, you said in your thing, the state has the authority over gun control in this state, not the counties. It comes from the state down to us. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So we don't have any authority here. We can say it in a resolution, which we've done. We support the Second Amendment. But making a ordinance that we're talking about that has no teeth, no authority, no jurisdiction whatsoever, I think is kind of a slap in the face to the Constitution. We're saying that it's not good enough that you've given us this. It's not good enough for what you said. We got to go say it again so we feel better about it. You know, and that's just my point. We've set a resolution which I strongly agree with. I don't agree with passing something that has no authority, that we have no jurisdiction in, just to do it.
So I have two questions. Actually, the lady back here who had brought how many signatures did you get on?
1,151, and I've got more since then, so.
Okay, so 1,151 signatures out of 125,000 people. Senator Rice, I have a question for you. Why have you not put forth this for the state to do for Sanctuary County for the state?
Which state?
I just hadn't done it
Sanctuary
yet.
State.
I will introduce legislation.
That's my question. So you're
Yeah.
planning on doing that?
Yeah.
So if he does that, then that would supersede anything that we do. So, thank you. I just wanted to know what
I'm
where
gonna
we
say this,
stood.
I mean, I believe in the grassroots, and I believe it's the grassroots right here, and sending a message to the state and to the federal government. So I would like to see you pass this ordinance to send a message to Columbia.
Thank you, Senator Rice.
Can I say?
Sir.
I would rather, you got thousands of signatures, that's your message to Columbia. We are a subsidy of you. So if what you said, if we pass something, whatever you have, we supersede it. What I would say is, you pass something, and then we'll follow along with whatever that goes into and support it.
We were one of the first to pass the resolution. And we jumped on that quick. And it goes so far, not just the Second Amendment, every amendment. We support the Constitution. That's what we swore under oath. Simple.
Right. Is there any other discussion amongst the council here? So I'm looking for where do we move forward with this?
I think we should, refer it back to council meeting and vote it in.
So is that
So we
first
gotta
reading or
do-
second?
Come up with
The thing
second
about
reading.
the thing about the amendment, that's true, but it's not necessarily this language. I would like to see language in that county council in Pickens County would never vote in anything like red flag law. I mean, that is possible that we could vote that in, right?
No, you can't. It's out of the hands.
It's
Columbia voted it in.
well, it's under the same, reservation of power that the state has, so we can't pass red flag laws, but the state, because the
Did
state.
not Columbia pass one?
Yeah, but it wasn't
The state can, the county
No,
can't.
Didn't the
Columbia
city-
City passed a red flag law.
But then didn't it
Not,
get,
no,
I thought
I
they
don't
tried,
know
they
they
got
did.
overturned.
But anything like that Pickens County Council would never pass anything that would inhibit the Second Amendment, on any level. Now, that's not to say that, federal and state can pass something, and we would have to go by it, but Pickens County would never do that. And put that in an ordinance, and then if you, then in future, Pickens County, maybe a council that nobody, in the future, they start to pass something, they'd have to repeal that.
Well, but any future, we can't make an ordinance, just like we were talking before, we can't pass an ordinance that affects, we can't prevent them from passing another ordinance.
It's true, but they'd have to repeal the one we did.
It would take 3 readings and 3 readings.
You know, I just don't see a bunch of stuff for show. I would like to see
Well,
the
you do
state do
that every
something.
week, you do that every month. We have firefighter month, we have police officer of the year month, we have nurses month.
We do,
We
that's all
do that every
recognition, that's all
month, every month.
recognition.
Okay, guys.
That's all recognition, that's not an ordinance.
That's true, but the Second Amendment's more important than any of them.
I understand.
No. Okay, so the motion on the table is to move this thing forward to council meeting for second reading. With changing the language, is that what you were saying?
Yeah.
I'll second it with I'd like to amend it to recommit it to work through the language.
This, I think, I would defer to the clerk, but I think this is first reading, I think y'all referred it to the committee.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's, well, I don't know.
Okay, I'll second it and then make a motion that we amend it to recommit it to work out the language.
Is it, in the discussion, is it possible to, since whatever we do can be overruled by the state?
Yeah.
It's true with anything. though.
With anything.
With anything. So he's saying he's gonna put something out there. I think since the state is the one that regulates guns, shouldn't they be the one to lead on this?
But, okay, so here, my argument to this is, I understand what you're saying. My argument to this is, we're not doing something against to try to get them to change. We're trying to say, no, we fully support it, keep it. And I'm not 100% sold on the ordinance part. I do believe in us making a stronger statement, but I'm willing to continue to look at what the language might be. So I'd like to.
I'll be honest with you, we're not gonna do an ordinance. If we're gonna do another resolution, it's worthless. We're not gonna do an ordinance. We just don't need to do anything, because we don't feel strongly enough about it. And
To me,
I'm not criticizing anybody, I'm just saying, if it's not in this council's will to do an ordinance, there's no use to do another resolution, because we've already done a resolution.
So I'm with you. You're wanting to send a strong statement.
Yes.
So the motion, second, to move it forward for first reading and then continue to work on the language. I'm gonna vote in support of it. Is there anybody else, any other discussion? All those in favor signify by raising your hand. Opposed? All right, we're moving it out of committee for first reading, and if you will work on the language of what Councilman Hudson was talking about, if this was also to recommit it back to committee of the whole for further discussion. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, it's 8:21 for the sake of everyone's time. I'll make a motion to adjourn.
All those in favor signify by raising your hand, and that motion carries. Thank you.